Hey YouTube, today we're going to talk about another company, another firearm company called Smith and Wesson. Uh, I'm not a historian and I'm not a Smith and Wesson expert. I just felt it's noteworthy to talk about them since I own a couple Smith and Wessons. Now, what I have in front of you here is a couple examples of revolvers made by Smith and Wesson. I have a Smith and Wesson Model 629. I have a Smith and Wesson Model 586. This one's in 44 Magnum, and this one's chambered in 357 Magnum. The reason I chose both of these is because Smith & Wesson is 100% responsible for both of those cartridges ever existing. They invented the 44 Magnum, and they invented the 357 Magnum. So a little bit of brief history on Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson started in 1856. It was called the Smith & Wesson Revolver Company. Started by a guy named Horace Smith and a guy named Dan Wesson. They had a previous venture called the Volcanic Rifle Company. It only lasted a couple years, and they actually sold it out to Winchester, and that started Winchester Repeating Firearms. So basically, Smith & Wesson was actually responsible for starting Winchester rifles, and not a lot of people know that. So when they started it, they focused 100% on revolvers. Hence why it was called the Smith & Wesson Revolver Company. And they actually produced a bunch of small pocket-held self-defense revolvers to begin with. Well, they actually came out with the very first ever cartridge-loaded revolver for the United States service. It was called the Smith & Wesson Model 3, and it was chambered in 44 Smith & Wesson. Now, like a lot of stuff that Smith & Wesson's done, it's been overshadowed by their number one competitor, which is Colt. And I did a video on Colt also. They're equally as good of a company, and they've been in about as equally as much trouble over time, financially, with poor decisions and all that kind of stuff. But we're only talking about Smith & Wesson today. So Smith & Wesson produced Model 3. The Army adopted it, but it was ultimately beat out by the Colt Single Action Army. So Smith & Wesson decided to start focusing more towards like the civilian and police departments. So they produced in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they produced what they call the Model 10. It's probably absolutely their most successful revolver they ever made. They've made millions of them things. There's every single police department probably in the United States at one time used the Smith & Wesson Model 10. It was chambered in 38 Special. You can still find them everywhere at every gun show. You can pick them up for a couple $100, $200 or $300 for a beat up one, an old police turn-in one. And they're actually really good revolvers. They're a real good bargain if somebody wanted a nice revolver. Well, around 1935, they decided to step up their game a little bit, and they wanted to make a more powerful revolver for the police departments. So they came out with the 357 Magnum. Yes, that's right, folks. Smith & Wesson came out. They invented the 357 Magnum, and this is not what they invented first. This is a Model 586. Here, this is a 586 no dash 357 Magnum. It's a real nice revolver, but this isn't the first one they came out with. The first one they came out with was called a registered Magnum. It was a large frame, more similar to this one here, and it was chambered in 357 Magnum, and you could literally get that gun any way you wanted. It was literally made to order. You get any barrel length you wanted, different variety of sights and grips and stuff like that. It was almost like ordering a custom 1911 from like Wilson Combat today. They were very well made, very awesome, and it was only called the registered Magnum because Smith & Wesson had yet started assigning model names to them. So when they started doing that, that ultimately became the Smith & Wesson Model 27, which is a large frame 357 Magnum. Very cool gun. They're pretty cool. Well, their biggest competitor tried to one-up them in 1955, and they came out with what they called the Colt Python. Colt Python is probably the most iconic 357 Magnum of all time, and it's very odd that the Colt did not invent the 357 Magnum. They just perfected it. So they took something that Smith and Wesson had already done and they perfected it. And if anybody's ever looked at an old Colt Python, right on the barrel, it says 357 Magnum cartridge. And the reason it said that is Smith and Wesson had the patent on the 357 Magnum, so they couldn't write 357 Magnum on their barrel. Not a lot of people know that either. And that's one of the old Colt Pythons, a 357 Magnum cartridge. Well, it was a home run for Colt, and everybody loved that revolver. It was just very expensive because it was all the hand fitting and everything went in it. But Smith & Wesson had a good answer, and that year they invented, in 1955, the 44 Magnum. And what they came out with was the Model 29. It looked exactly like this, only it was in blue. So this is a stainless one. This is a Model 629, but the one they came out with in 1955 was a Model 29, large frame 44 Magnum. Very first 44 Magnum ever made, and boy, that thing was awesome. And Colt never made a 44 Magnum. They never made one until the 90s, believe it or not. And so if you wanted a 44 Magnum, you had to go buy a Smith & Wesson, and everybody loved it. And then the Dirty Harry movies came out in like the 70s, and that thing really took off. You couldn't get one anywhere. You couldn't put your hands on them. So moving a little bit fast forward until the 90s, Smith & Wesson started to get into some pretty big trouble here. When I say trouble, it's not like they were going to get arrested, but it's poor decision making, and that usually happens in big successful companies. You know, their sales have started to decline a little bit. The popularity of these revolvers started going downhill since most of the police departments were changing from revolvers to like imported automatics like Glocks. And so Smith & Wesson actually made an agreement in 2000 with Bill Clinton himself, the President of the United States, and he decided he would make Smith & Wesson agree to do some changes to their weapons design, and if they did that, he would give them like the carte blanche to be sold to the government. It was actual BS, to be honest with you, and it was called the preferred buying program, and the government was going to buy Smith & Wesson weapons if they complied with what Bill Clinton wanted them to do, and it was absolutely 100% Bill Clinton. So Smith & Wesson redesigned their revolvers, and they made, the biggest change they made was right here. They put a key lock on them, so children couldn't access the guns. You had to have a little key. It actually affected the action. The actions weren't made as good. They felt a little sandpaper-ish here. It just wasn't built as well. And then they also made a pact to not ever sell their weapons in any store that sold any type of assault weapons or anything on the ban list during the assault weapons ban leading up to that. And boy, did they take some slack for that. There was people boycotting them everywhere, including the NRA. Nobody wanted a Smith & Wesson, and they really suffered for it. It was almost like they made a deal with the devil, and it didn't work out well for them. A lot of companies make poor decisions and all, and companies that we all love, but that was a pretty poor one. So it really didn't work out that well for them. And then Smith & Wesson got acquired by Tompkins Corporation in the early 2000s because they were in some really hard times and all that. And they've been sold off a couple times here and there until now, but it's really funny how they were willing to sell out for a little bit of a promise from the Clinton administration, And now they actually produce AR-15s. They produce semi-automatic polymer guns and all the stuff that they said they were against in the 80s and the 90s. And now they produce all that stuff. And I understand technology's caught up, and there's not a lot of people left in the revolver game. And I love revolvers myself. I mean, I appreciate them a lot, but a lot of the younger crowd, they don't understand revolvers. They think they're really simple, and they're really not. They're a lot more complex than a semi-automatic pistol. But Smith and Wesson produces all of that, and they actually got a little bit of slack because their AR-15s were used in a couple mass shootings, and it has nothing to do with Smith and Wesson, folks. Nothing to do with it. But it's just ironic how when you start making deals with bad people, and then you sell off again to do something that you said you were totally against, and then your stuff is going and used in bad stuff like that. I mean, is it really worth it, folks? You know, you gotta be you in life. I don't understand these people that want to be something that they're not. Okay, this was a firearm company. It was a very successful firearm company. They made really good stuff. I mean, you can't get much of a better revolver than either one of these right here. And when they made that Clinton deal, all that went down the drain, and their quality just went downhill, and they've never recovered from it. If you go to the store today and you pick up a brand new Smith and Wesson, I think they make what they call the classic version, and we're just going to use this example for this 586. The action does not feel like this. It doesn't open and close like this. The finish doesn't look like this. The grips doesn't look like this. It doesn't work this easy. The action, it's not even close. And they've never recovered from a couple bad mistakes made by things that look good on paper. Whenever something looks good on paper, you always have to look at the whole picture, folks. And just because it looks good on paper doesn't mean it's going to work. And I think that was the start of their downfall when they made a deal with the Clinton administration. Now, what a lot of people do is they call that lock that they put on it the Hillary hole. And those people actually make themselves look stupid because Hillary Clinton didn't have anything to do with it. It was Bill Clinton that actually made the deal. 100% Bill Clinton. But anyway, folks, I just wanted to do a quick rundown of some of the mistakes and where Smith & Wesson is today. They produce everything today. They produce AR-15s, they produce polymer striker fire guns. At one time, they produced single action only automatics, kind of like the 1911s. They've always produced really good revolvers. And just wanted to give you a quick rundown of the Smith & Wesson firearm company. And if you have any questions on them, I'll try my best to answer. Like I said, I'm not a historian. I'm just like firearms, and I'll be glad to try and find the answer for you if I don't know it. But anyway, folks, thank you very much for watching my video today, and you folks have a great day.